one reason why I kind of think we're within a few months of some sort of pivot here. Number one, the sentiment in the space. You see the way the price charts look, looking at NASDAQ, looking at tech, looking at crypto. I mean, everything looks like shit right now, right? So they always say markets always look, it's always darkest before the dawn, that kind of thinking. And most people get most pessimistic at the bottom and most optimistic at the top. And I'm hearing a lot of people starting to talk about recession, hearing a lot of people starting to talk about, it's all over, it's the end of the world, all that. Bear orgy, circle jerk commencing. Yeah. But what's really interesting is this is a look at generations. So this is me, is my generation, sort of in my peak earnings years. This is my father's generation and his respective pivot from the fear cycle into the greed cycle, which usually happens right around these 1980, 2020. Like I said, I actually think the cycle pivot was 1718, but nonetheless, if you look at that Benner cycle, there's 2019, like we talked about. Remember, this is an adjusted chart. So this takes in all the sort of bank manipulation of price. This is my grandfather's market, and he was a big industrialist through the Second World War. And this is my great-grandfather's market. And it's kind of cool that actually TradingView even has this data going back over 100 years. So this is my great-grandfather's market. Fascinating how you can see sort of through, 2019 peak. Remember that Benner cycle? Here's, I guess the relative same one would be sort of 76, 78, 79, that peak there. Here is 1939. So interesting how 1939 set up that dump. And of course, here is 1899. Got a party like it's 1899. So fascinating how there's a lot of similarities going on here, right? Notice how in the most two recent cycles, banksters own this market. It's their market. In fact, just to remind the new president who was elected, who was actually boss, I think that they actually took a poke at Ronald Reagan just to remind him who's driving the bus through here. And I noticed following that event, Mr. Reagan never said boo to the banksters. And actually, all of his public commentary was anti-banksters. In fact, pro-banksters. In fact, his vice president, and one of the reasons, one of the ways that he got elected, and of course, I've talked to you guys before about how I believe George Bush Sr. is actually the reason why we have as much inflation today. We won't go into that now. But the point being, banksters owned Mr. Reagan, and, deficit spending was all of a sudden became all the rage. And of course, we live in the world we live in thanks to that. 1939, 1940, interesting. This is basically your Bretton Woods event. Same thing. Banksters own the market through here. We often make reference to, holy crap, look at the way the debt to GDP ratio went absolutely insane. And they often say that the reason why that happened was because of World War II. Well, no. And in actual fact, all of that sort of 400% debt to GDP was all a function of the Great Reset. Banksters run the economy. Now, looking back at my great-grandfather, remember, the banksters did not take over the system until over here. And you remember, all you historians, in fact, actually, it was right there. That is where the banksters took over. Interesting how the cycle pivot was supposed to come in here, but the banksters were not in control. And notice that the market actually had kind of a wonky. There's 2, right? That's sort of where we are now. And I think what actually has to end up happening if the market acts naturally is, remember, think George Benner and Benner's cycle. I think the market actually has to go like A, B, C, D down into these lows through that. And in this case, the end of this was 1903. So here we are. There's 22. There's 23. I have no idea how this is going to end. Now, if we're lucky and these banksters get away with what they've done, and my hunch is they'll put Mr. Putin back in a box, they'll top out the commodity prices, and as Mr. Williams has told us recently, check out my Twitter feed and, of course, site commentary and daily briefs and stuff about Mr. Williams. We pivot back to the upside here somewhere around the middle of this year. If, however, the banksters are not in control, I actually think there's one more leg to the downside here, which might just catch everybody off guard. And this actually would be sort of that kind of Bitcoin bottoms into the new year and then just bump along for the good portion of the year, trying to find that low. And then coming out of 2005, in this case, 2023, out the other side, we look back and go, yep, well, that was your bottoming window. It's a tough one. Like I said, if we're really lucky, and I don't know how this is going to play out, we get that pivot sort of in the next couple months. But I think, as Mr. Williams said, I don't think it's in our best interest to put the cart before the horse and start saying this is what's going to happen. I think, if anything, like Mr. Williams said, what we have to see, and really the cool part about it, and pop on the site if you want, we do a 30-day trial. As we said, we actually have sort of a hidden tool that is going to tell us exactly when we go back into easy mode. And it's basically this image. When this image ends out and it starts rolling over, then we know that Mr. Williams' thesis of the end of the interest rate shock is over. And if you know what happens when interest rates top out, once the shock is over, what happens to risk assets, then you'll know what happens next. So it hasn't yet. And the thing is we have, in this case, weekly M's, Andre. But we have to see this top out. As soon as it does top out and it's done, then I think we can officially start thinking, okay, phew, the shit's over. Let's get back to business.